Hi, I'm Pete Bauer, author of Photoshop for Dummies. Photoshop CS5 for Dummies is our latest version. I'm also the Help Desk Director for the National Association of Photoshop Professionals. In every way, shape, and form imaginable. I used to be a film photographer. I had my first darkroom back in 1969 when I was 12 years old. Don't do the math. I had my very first darkroom and I shot film up until I became familiar with Photoshop in version 5.5. And Photoshop gives me capabilities I never had in the darkroom, whether shooting grayscale, black and white film as we called it, or in color. I can do things simply, easily, and quickly in Photoshop with my images that were never possible before. And let's not forget about the film industry and what's going on with them. Photoshop and other software has completely revolutionized what we see on the screen. Well, content-aware fill is my #1 favorite feature. This, instead of just transforming an area, it samples the pixels around and seamlessly blends to hide or to fill or even to scale. That's #1 on my list. I think #2 on my list must be Merge to HDR Pro. The improvements in the Merge to HDR, the high dynamic range capabilities of Photoshop are greatly improved. Well, some of the time-saving features include Mini Bridge. It's a panel that floats right inside Photoshop that gives you most of the capabilities for image selection, opening, and locating images right in Photoshop. You don't have to jump to Bridge. You can do it right in Photoshop in the Mini Bridge panel. We also have new overlays for the crop tool. If you work with the rule of thirds in your photography, or as we call it in my studio, the suggestion of thirds, you can activate that overlay or a grid right in the crop tool while you're working. One other feature that comes to mind that's particularly handy for those switching to Mac from Windows, we added it in Photoshop CS4, but people just don't seem to remember it. In the window menu in Photoshop, you can activate the application frame, which isolates Photoshop from any other programs that happen to be running at the time on the Mac and hides your desktop. So if you're a switcher and you want a more PC-like environment, activate the application frame. You may have noticed this. This is the stylus for my Wacom tablet. I use the Intuos 4 when I travel because it fits right in my laptop case. In my studio, I use a Cintiq, which combines a monitor and a tablet so I can paint or make a layer mask while looking at the exact pixels of my image. If you're a professionally trained artist, consider a larger tablet. If you're like the rest of us, consider a smaller tablet. But if you're a Photoshop professional, definitely consider a tablet. The first thing is hardware. If you're on a Mac running Snow Leopard operating system 10.6, an upgrade to Photoshop CS5 you should consider mandatory. Find the budget. Photoshop CS5 for the first time is 64-bit capable on the Mac. What this means is it can process more than twice as much data. You can use as much RAM, computer memory, as you can cram into that machine. It's incredibly fast, incredibly powerful. If you skipped Photoshop CS4, it's time to get caught up. Jumping from CS2 or CS3 to CS5 is a great idea because, as I mentioned early and often to friends, content-aware capabilities in Photoshop CS5 can save you acres of time, more than enough to pay for itself in a single job. I think that everyone who uses Photoshop as a photographer needs to have a photographic background. It's fine to be a self-taught photographer, but if you've never taken a class in photography, check out your local community college. Just learn from a pro who teaches in the classroom the basics of photography. Learn about composition, learn about lighting, learn about exposure. Don't just shoot automatic if you don't have to. Learn about your camera, learn about photography, and Photoshop will become much easier. Because after all, the best way to get a great photo out of Photoshop is to bring a great photo into Photoshop. I'm Pete Bauer, and I want to thank you for spending a few minutes with me. For more information about Photoshop CS5 and for more tips and tricks, pick up a copy of Photoshop CS5 for Dummies. I'd also like to say hello and thank you to the thousands of members of the National Association of Photoshop Professionals. Their questions to the NAPP Help Desk help keep me at the top of my game, help me be prepared to help them with questions, and to teach you more about Photoshop.